So I am so excited about this conversation to be speaking with Dana. Um, well, first, actually, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
So, hi everyone. I'm Dana. I'm from Kazakhstan, and I'm an environmental scientist. And to be more precise, I'm a microplastic researcher. Uh, I started that 3 years ago back in Kazakhstan, where I became the first ever microplastic researcher in Kazakhstan and the whole Central Asia. And this topic was so interesting for me, a bit shocking in some places, but very interesting. I also wanted to share this knowledge with the world, with the people. And last year, the beginning of the last year, I started creating content, like educational content on microplastics. Yeah, and I'm currently doing that.
And that's how I found you, which was awesome to see that there was an actual like study, or researchers that were focused specifically on microplastics because just a personal story, whole bunch club, this whole thing that I started, it really came out of when I had my first child and my husband and I went deep into microplastics and it was so scary. And I like finally we realized all of the places where we were finding plastic and we were trying to do everything we could to minimize the exposure. But it's kind of an emerging field of research.
Yeah, I was doing my bachelor's back then in civil and environmental engineering, and I started working as a research assistant with my environmental chemistry professor. And then there was a time when my professor wanted for me to work independently, like on my own research topic, and he suggested me to work on microplastics. And at that time, like I didn't know much about them. Like I knew like some basics, like yeah, microplastics, they're just tiny particles of plastic, and they are coming from big plastic objects, and that's it. But we never really studied the environmental impact or just in general the topic of microplastics during my studies, during my bachelor's, and I think it's still the case. I didn't have a lot of interest in the beginning, and when he suggested me, he was like, it's a hot topic right now. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of scientists who are working on it right now, and it's becoming more and more interesting. But at the same time, it's very understudied. So there's a lot of work to do. Um, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna just start reading the papers and see what it is, what it's all about. And when I started reading, I was so shocked. I was like, just reading, and every piece of paper, every piece of information for me was like, oh my god, like why is
Oh,
nobody talking about this? And the first thing for me is that the fact that microplastics are absolutely everywhere, like wherever scientists are looking or researchers are looking, they're finding these particles, these microplastics. Another thing is there are so many things that I didn't know that are plastic. Like when you think of plastic, you are probably imagining like the plastic bottles or plastic bags maybe. So like in general some plastic things, but they can be so different, like completely different. Like they can be clothes, like polyester or acrylics or nylon. Another thing is that that microplastics are put into personal care products as an ingredient. um, Another thing is what else, like chewing gums, the base of the chewing gum is plastic. Many
are you
things.
serious?
Yeah, that's true.
Oh
That
my,
was like one of the shocking things for me.
wait, I'm throwing out my gum. Throwing it out.
They're actually plastic-free gums. You can
Oh,
so many things, like so many of them, that you don't even know. Like paper cups. The name itself, like it's missing, like paper, but in reality, it's lined with plastic inside. So it's half paper, half plastic. Uh, Another recent thing that I learned is that aluminum cans, they're lined with plastic inside as well. Like,
what? Oh,
yeah.
okay. So I have so many questions, and I want to hear all of these things. Just to start, I want to go back to that. But just to
Uh-huh.
start for the audience, can you just tell us, like, for the average person, not a scientist, but like, what are microplastics and why are we concerned about them?
Microplastics are plastics. So just to understand, it's plastic. The name micro gets from the size. So if the size of the plastic is less than 5 millimeters, then we can call it microplastic. So it's very, very tiny particles of plastic. They can be very different types. In general, we divide them into two types: primary microplastics and secondary microplastics. So, primary microplastics are those that were manufactured to be very small. Those are usually used in personal care products, as I said, as an ingredient. So, it's very, very fine. It looks like powder. I work with those microplastics in my research, and they really look like powder, like, setting powder. It
Yeah.
looks like that.
Wow.
Um, and another thing is secondary microplastics. So it's like plastic that were degraded or came from bigger plastic objects, like, the plastic water bottle you have, and then it will release a lot of tiny, tiny particles of plastic, which we will call secondary microplastics. So it's coming from a bigger plastic object. Why we are concerned with that is the fact that it's absolutely everywhere. That's the first thing. As I said, we found them in like everywhere we're looking, in very, very distant islands, like very high peaks, mountain peaks, or like very deep water depths. So we're finding them everywhere. Apart from the environment, we're finding them in different animals and in humans, like
Yeah.
in a lot of different organs of humans. I think uh, almost in every organ, if not in every one of them, we're finding microplastics. And there are a lot of different problems related to that, like both environmental, health problems.
When I first started getting interested in and like being more conscious about bringing plastic into my home, my parents were like, "Oh, you're so dramatic. Like we never did this when you guys were kids." And I would explain to them like this wasn't as pervasive. It wasn't as much of an issue 30 years ago when we were kids. And even 50, 60 years ago, I mean, Tupperware was only created 50 years ago or something. I mean, it's getting more and more pervasive. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, plastic was first invented in the way we're seeing plastic right now. It was around 80 years ago. So, like, in terms of materials, or yeah, I would say in terms of materials, it's a quite new material. Uh, like, for example, if we just compare it to other materials, fabrics, we have wood, we have like different metals, we have glass, or cotton, and they've been around for thousands of years, like
Right.
literally thousands. And we know how they work, we know how they will what they will do to the environment or to our human health. But when it comes to plastic, there are so many unknowns. Like,
Right.
it's been around for 80 years, and the fact that it leaches so many microplastics was actually found like maybe 15, 20 years ago or something. Like, it's a very new topic, a very new field of science. So of course there are gonna be a lot of unknowns. But when you say the pervasiveness of the plastic, it's the fact that it doesn't degrade very easily. So any plastic object that has ever been produced like 80 years ago, it's gonna still be around if it's not recycled. But even if it's recycled, it's still here, right?
Yeah.
So it's gonna stay here.
Wow. Given that there's still so many unknowns, and this is really, a lot of it is emerging research. I was even surprised in how many of my friends who also had kids didn't know not to, there are things that I thought were obvious, like don't heat milk in a plastic bottle or don't put your to-go containers in the microwave, things like that. So there are things that can, amplify or exacerbate the leaching, or like definite things that we shouldn't do. And then there are also like better choices, right? So I first found you from this video that you did on silicone, and that freaked me out because I always thought that silicone, I've never ever bought a plastic bottle for either of my kids. I use glass at home, and when I travel, I mean, I love silicone, and I get silicone plates, like everything. And I really thought that that was a safe alternative. And then I saw your video on silicone, and I was like, what? Have I messed up? I've been trying so hard. So tell me, what are you learning about silicone? Because I thought that was safe.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting topic. I like this one because with plastic, with conventional plastic, yeah, there are so many types of them, but you would more or less understand that they are releasing microplastics. And I always, for a year, I had this question about silicone, because you know that silicone is it's another type of plastic. Like if you Google that, you will understand that silicone is another type of plastic. But if you try to Google if silicone sheds microplastics, like even right now, if you try to Google it, you will have so many websites telling that it's not. Like it's not shedding
Yeah.
any microplastics. Like it's yeah, like in those websites, they're saying like, yeah, silicone is a type of plastic, but it's much durable. It has like different structure. That's why it's very, stiff. So microplastics are not coming off from silicone. And I was like, okay, that's I found this information, but I wasn't really sure if that's 100% true, because it's a kind of plastic. So how come this doesn't shed any microplastics? So I went to my professor. He's done his PhD in chemistry, and he's doing a lot of work on microplastics as well. And I was like, when I tried to Google if silicone sheds microplastics, it's always there are so many websites that are saying like, no, it doesn't shed any microplastic.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's not like other plastics. And he was like, okay, but that's strange, because I would assume as a chemist that it will shed microplastic if it's plastic.
Huh.
And I started like looking for different research papers, and it's really hard to find anything on silicone and microplastics. Like there are not a lot of people who are doing that. Like there's not a lot of people who are doing microplastics, yet
Yeah.
alone silicone with microplastics. But I did find some papers, and most of them were related to like different baby stuff, because silicone is used a lot in baby products like baby cutlery and stuff like this. And I think in that exact paper they used baby teats and pacifiers, uh, because they you usually steam them for
Right.
disinfection. So they tried to mimic how would a parent disinfect those using steam and like hot steaming and stuff like this, or hot boiling water. And they found that silicone sheds microplastics.
Oh my God.
And
Oh.
and then I also found other papers on other things about silicone. Like I think I found three papers, and in all those three papers, they were stating like, yes, silicone sheds microplastic. Yes, it sheds way less microplastic than conventional plastic, but it doesn't mean it doesn't shed any microplastics at all.
But I mean, there's really no alternative because unless you're breastfeeding, because even a glass bottle, it has a silicone
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
teat.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. I mean, it created a lot of discussions when I made the video, like a lot of
yeah.
parents asking, but what are the alternatives? And I honestly don't know the alternative. I think it's still better than using plastic, of course, but when it comes to the alternatives, I think I don't have anything to suggest, but I really wanted to share my finding because it was very interesting for me. And because again, there are so many misinformation. I mean, so many websites saying that it doesn't shed any microplastic. Well, in fact, it does shed.
So are there like better ways to clean, the
Yeah,
silicone?
I honestly don't know. I think if you're using silicone as a parent, as a mother or a father, it's still you're doing a great job. Like raising a baby, it's a very difficult task. yet alone trying to, avoid as many microplastics as possible. So I would say people not to freak out about this. If you can, of course, in some places to switch from silicone to something else, like wooden something, then do that if it's possible, of course. Silicone is still better than usual plastic, so you're doing a great job.
Can you explain how is silicone plastic? Because isn't it made from rubber?
Yeah, it's made from rubber. It's
Okay.
like a mix, so it's a
Yeah.
plastic.
So I think, I mean, the purpose of this, yeah, like you said, is not to freak out. And, we know that they're pervasive. We know that it's unavoidable. But I think just having the information and knowing what are the best options and what we should maybe minimize where we can is super helpful. So is there any way or any research like showing like do these particles leave the body? Like can you cleanse or detox in any way, or is it just do your best to avoid it?
It's both of those. I mean, some big part of microplastic that you ingest, it will come out naturally. Some will stay, unfortunately, and there's not a lot of things that you can do as apart from avoiding as much plastics as possible. Uh, and another thing, there is a very interesting paper that I read quite recently, like a couple of months ago, maybe last year. Um, it was about, that there are so many chemicals on top of microplastics. So while the plastic itself, it's considered inert, so it means that it doesn't readily react with other chemicals. So it might not have a lot of reactions with your body. But the thing is, microplastic never comes alone. Like it's usually covered with a lot of chemicals because uh, in order to give a plastic a certain feature, you need to add chemicals. For example, if you want plastic to be flexible, you need to add phthalates, for example. So that's why microplastics, they never come alone. So they have a lot of chemicals on surface. Those can be BPA, phthalates, I don't know, a lot of other things. And flame retardants, for example, paints. So yeah, like the list goes on. That's why we even call microplastic a cocktail of chemicals. So it can be very, very different and a lot of them. And those chemicals, unfortunately, they can be harmful. So we know, for example, that BPA is very frequently used in the production of plastic. It's called like BPA is even called like a plastic associated chemical, and those could be harmful to your body. For example, BPA is an endocrine disruptor, a very famous endocrine disruptor that can, you know, disrupt your hormones and, mess with your reproductive system and stuff like this. So those chemicals, they are bad. And there was a recent paper that is very interesting that said that fermented foods have an ability to, negate, to reduce the impact of those chemicals that on top of microplastic. It will not remove microplastics per se from your body, but it can reduce the negative impact of microplastics on your gut health, for example. So it's fermented foods like pickles, yogurt, kimchi, things like that. So eating those, they're very rich in probiotics. So it can reduce the impact of the chemicals that
Cool.
are on top of microplastics.
Okay, that's great news. That's really interesting. So you mentioned BPA. We always look for BPA free as much as we can. So there are obviously different levels, right? Of if we assume that microplastics are kind of everywhere, or plastic is a material that is so commonly used. There are different levels, right? So you said silicone is better. What are other terms that we should look for? Because I feel like companies, especially, they hide their ingredients in all of these like complicated words. I've been I've been doing a lot of research for my product safety guide, and I've had to research like all of these individual words that they use. So what are some key terms that we should be aware of and maybe try to avoid as best as we can?
BPA and I think phthalates are usually the ones that are in food packaging and like the bottles from like different shampoos and stuff like this. Yeah.
What about food grade plastic? What does that mean?
Yeah, a food grade plastic is, I think it's usually PT. It's the ones that you can put into microwave and stuff like this. And I think they tend to have less chemicals there, but I know that they still shed microplastics. Like,
Yeah.
even if it's microwave safe, it doesn't mean it's microplastic safe.
So before you were mentioning some surprising places, and I think it's really useful to go through kind of these specific products that we don't necessarily realize are plastic. You mentioned clothing. Something that never even occurred to me was like stuffed animals and babies. They put everything in their mouth, and I didn't even know polyester is a plastic. And so when a baby is snuggling with a teddy bear at night and they're eating it, they're consuming all of those fibers. So I got my kids. I looked specifically, for 100% cotton stuffed animal. And so that's like a really easy swap, right? Instead of giving them a polyester teddy bear, give them a cotton one. So what are some other surprising places that we should just be aware of so that we can be more mindful when we're shopping? So swap to glass or wood or cotton, those materials that you mentioned.
One of the biggest is plastic cutting board. I don't think it's very it is obvious, but I think it's very important to mention, like plastic cutting boards or any plastic cutleries. Like I don't know who came up with the idea of creating cutleries from plastic because they're gonna literally melt when exposed to heat,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's not very practical. But if you use them, they will release a lot of microplastics as well. Um, Another, if we talk about shocking things, it's like chewing gum. A lot of gum brands, they use polyethylene, I think, like plastic in their gum bases. Another thing is tea bags and coffee pots or coffee pots. Yeah, coffee
Yeah.
pots. They can be made with plastic. Tea bags, some of them, like, triangle shaped, those are definitely plastics. Those are nylon. But there are also those that look like paper. But unfortunately, to seal this paper, they use plastic-based glues. So even those that look like paper, they can still
Okay.
contain plastic and they still can release microplastics. Uh,
So
what
use
else?
so
Oh,
use loose leaf tea with a metal tea strainer. See, that's
yeah,
another
yeah,
easy swap. So there's nothing to freak out about. It's just okay. Now we know. Let's just use loose
yeah,
leaf
yeah, yeah.
tea
Yeah,
like we
and
have
loose
for
leaf tea
thousands
is,
of
by the
years.
way, it's better quality. It's
Yeah, and we've been doing it
better.
for thousands of years. So it's just,
Exactly.
and in some cases, it's like an actually in the modern, this modern era, we're so used to convenience and speed, and we're all really busy, and I totally get that, especially as a working mom.
Mhm.
But some things may take an extra step, like packaged food. I try, I give my kids pouches when I'm on the go when I really need a snack, but day to day, I make a smoothie and I put it in, like I do homemade pouches instead. So
Mhm.
loose leaf tea, I mean, it might be an extra step, but whenever I can, I try because those little things add up. So
Yeah.
I found that to be helpful. What about milk cartons or, like liquid cartons that are cardboard and they say they're recyclable? I'm assuming after speaking with you, they're probably lined with plastic.
Yeah, some of them are lined with plastic, and as I said, like paper, cardboard, aluminum cans, they can be lined with plastic, and it's in general, in most cases, it's the case that they are lined with plastic, and they're gonna leach microplastics. Um, yeah, yeah.
And
So
what
if you
about,
can, if you can switch to glass or to steel, for example, then it's a better choice, of course.
Yeah, anything else
Yeah.
that comes to mind?
Yeah, so it's clothing, bed sheets, another, yeah, because
Do we
again,
inhale
textiles.
do we inhale? I guess when we're sleeping in it.
Yeah, we're sleeping, so it's dermal contact. Also, we're inhaling that, and of course, every time you wash them in the washing machine, there are gonna be a lot of microplastic that's gonna be entering our environment. And if something is entering the environment, it's gonna re-enter your environment again. Like everything is super connected. So, yes.
Do air filters help with that?
I'm not 100% sure because, um, as I said again, microplastic is a very new field. So I think air filters weren't specifically designed to remove microplastics. So they don't have, any testing on microplastics. I
Right.
think they might have, like, when you think of it, like logically, of course, there could be that there's some microplastic that are removed, but I cannot say like how
Yeah.
many percent, for example. Yeah, it's good to, in general, to open your windows regularly. Not only because of microplastics, but in general. But when it comes to microplastics as well, because indoor concentration of microplastic is much higher than outdoors.
Okay.
So at least there's some, exchange of microplastics.
Okay, so to summarize, I want to also end this on a more hopeful note, but what
Yeah.
are kind of your top tips for minimizing, exposure to microplastics? And we've already mentioned some of them, but if you could just kind of like put it out in a list, your top recommendations.
Yes, for sure. First thing is the number one advice for me is anything that is connected, related to your food. So if it's possible to remove any plastic from hot food or from cooking itself, it's like the number one best advice. It's gonna literally save you like from trillions of microplastic per day. That's like number one thing. Another advice is vacuuming also helps a lot. Like it's
Okay.
maybe not a bit of an unexpected tip,
Hmm.
but vacuuming your house, keeping it clean, keeping the windows open, it all helps to minimize the microplastic concentration in your home, which in turn means less microplastic exposure. And as I said, like for example, eating fermented foods, which are rich in probiotics, that can help reduce some negative impact of the microplastic, but not only because of microplastic, it's actually good for your health, in, yeah, for different reasons. Yeah, I think that's it. Like in general, where you can possibly remove plastic, then do that.
Yeah, every bit helps. At least we can focus on what we can control. What about Teflon? What can you say about like non-stick coated pans?
I still don't have like a 100% opinion on that, but I do incline more on to avoid side, uh, because uh, Teflon, when scratched, if there's a one single scratch, it will start release microplastic into your food. Not to mention other things like PFAS, which is also where having more and more research saying that PFAS is also not good for your body, not good for the environment, and stuff like this. Um,
Those are the
and
forever chemicals.
yeah, forever chemicals. And alongside with PFAS, by the way, PFAS are also very associated with plastic. So they also come together very often.
Okay, so then to
So
summarize, it's like never heat food or anything in plastic. Use glass, wood, steel whenever possible. Vacuum, eat fermented foods.
yeah.
Okay, this is
Yeah,
doable.
and one thing that is very important as well, if um, it's demanding regulations, demanding policies, demanding laws related to plastic and microplastic, because currently there's a huge lack of them. Yeah, just a quick story. I
Yeah,
think
please.
it's going to be interesting. When I started my research in Kazakhstan, I did my research on wastewater. And I took wastewater from the wastewater treatment plant in my city. Did the tests, and finally I have the result. I have the number of how many of the concentration of microplastic in the wastewater. This was the final water that is going to be discharged directly into the water body. And I have the number. I think it was like a couple of billions of microplastics per day. And so I have this number, I have this result, and I was like, okay, if this number is too high, or is it normal, is it okay, like how do I understand if it's okay or not? So I wanted to compare it to like what are the limits in my country. Of course, I was uh, not very hopeful because it's a developing country and we didn't have the limits for microplastic. I was like, okay, that's understandable. Let's see what are the limits for microplastics in developed countries, in the US, in the European Union, in Canada maybe. And I started looking for these numbers, and I literally find nothing. Like
Wow.
there's not a single country, not a single wastewater treatment facility that is monitoring for microplastic concentration.
Wow.
So I
Wow.
just want you to understand the extent of the problem and the extent of the lack of the regulation. And it's and okay, it's just with the wastewater. Yeah, it just goes to the environment. Okay, maybe
Yeah.
people will not care about that, which is bad that you don't care. But okay, so it's the same with the water treatment plants. Water treatment plants, they don't have any regulations on the microplastic concentration. So I'm talking about the water that comes to you, not from you, but to
Yeah.
you, like
Yeah.
your tap water. It's not monitored. Not only it's not regulated. It's just not monitored. You don't have the concentration of microplastics, so you don't have the limits, of course. So you can have as many microplastics as you want in
Wow.
your water. It's not going to be regulated.
Yeah, and they don't even test for it or really disclose it because when I've been researching
Yeah.
heavy metals in food, you can find lab reports for, arsenic, lead, all of that stuff, but they don't test for, PFAs and phthalates. It's only independent, like independent investigators that I found online that have done their own testing, but yeah, they don't really disclose or even check for it.
Yeah,
Are there
yeah, it's not.
Yeah, it's like you said, still emerged. Lead became a big thing, and then everyone got all worked up about lead, and it made like actual change was made. So I think that you're onto something, and plastic will be the next lead, and hopefully we'll see some real regulatory advancements coming out of that. Is there any
Yeah.
place, any active campaigns that you know of, or any place where people can um, you know, find how to advocate for these kinds of policy changes?
Yeah, there's this great advocacy organization called Story of Stuff. It's great. I worked with them once, and currently I'm working on a whole series about the microplastics. It will be called Microplastic: A Story in Parts. They have a lot of different petition, a lot of different campaigns, which is also very interesting, and you should definitely check them out. I
Amazing.
think maybe on change.org you can also find some related to plastics. And just to finish this on the bright side, I had this discussion with one guy. He's working in the he's working on the technology that is removing microplastic from water, and he's been working on microplastic topic for a long time. And what he told me when we were discussing microplastic is that he told me like we are at this historical moment when we still have a lot of time to make microplastic not that big of a problem. So we right now we have the time, we have the tools, and if we'll have the public interest, we can make this problem not disappear, but this to reduce this problem until there's some irreversible change. So
Yeah.
yeah, he was full of hope, and I'm full of hope as well. I know it can be a very scary topic, like so overwhelming for a lot of people, for me as well. But I think you gotta stay hopeful, and there's definitely a change that's coming. So yeah,
Well,
yes, stay
that's
hopeful.
that's a fantastic way to end, and I'm so grateful for what you do, and for your colleagues who are leading research in this, like you said, kind of lesser known area. I think you're right that you're onto something, and it's like now is the time to really make change. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.